What is good, everyone? Welcome back to the Exhaust Notes Formula One podcast, your new favorite Formula One podcast, your favorite Formula One podcaster's favorite Formula One podcast, and my favorite Formula One podcast as well, because I get to talk to these gentlemen. Todd, Rohit, what's going on?
Living said dream.
Are you Esteban Ocon?
I am Hostaban Ocant.
As long as that's an A and not a U, I'm fine with it.
It means much different things in British terminology. That's like saying, hey, brother.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking like living Seb's dream is kind of where like my mind went when you said that. And I was like, I don't know if you're really that committed to making the planet a better place, Todd. No offense.
No. He's not.
No,
sad.
I mean, if you can see all of my material waste behind me, I'm definitely not. I like to think that I recycle and try to reduce water usage and electricity. But
speaking of water usage and tasteful living of dreams, I thought if anybody or any driver Todd was trying to emulate, it was one Valtteri Bottas with a certain risque photo shoot where we got to see his cheeks tastefully submerged under the purifying waters of Lake Minnetonka, if I did my geography right, but I don't think I did.
I can't believe did you actually get one of those calendars?
I did. I got the one you sent me. And
no, I got you the print, but there was a calendar. You saw that he released a full 12-month calendar.
You know what? When it comes to that man's ass, less is more. And
I disagree.
I'm going to go for quality of ass shot, not quantity. Because
I thought they were all tasteful.
There's not a question of being tasteful. It's just that man, despite being a Formula One driver, has a dump truck of an ass.
He's got that cake, as the kids say.
I was trying to get a spit take, listeners, and I thought I had it, but, one day.
Close.
Speaking of cheeks, talk to me about this race, gentlemen, because I did not see it, but I keep hearing things.
It was pretty cheeky.
Well, anything with Lando Norris. Cheeky. Yeah, I was going to say. There you go. We were all picking up what you were putting down.
It was. I mean, I can't be the only one. It was the most frustrating yet simultaneously joyous moment as a longtime McLaren stan to experience, because we had a 1-2. We've dreamt. When's the last time McLaren had a 1-2? Was it Danny Rick's last win at McLaren and Monza? I think they had a 1-2 that day.
Was Lando silver medalist that day? I don't remember.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, it was Danny Rick's sole win with McLaren. I'm pretty sure
2021.
And that's becoming more and more of a collector's item.
Yeah. But that doesn't even feel like it, right? Like it feels like it's a decade back plus.
It also just felt fluky, right? Because that's the race that Max ended up on top of Lewis in turn 1. Right?
Oh, that was that race?
I'm pretty sure that's that race, and that's why McLaren's out front. Because they were 3 and 4, I think.
Yeah.
If memory serves. It's a little foggy. But that felt fluky, and this felt for the first time more than a decade that McLaren on outright pace won a race. And then they had to go and fuck it all up. So, quick rundown of the events since Ro didn't watch. Lando Norris starts on pole. Oscar was in P2. Into turn 1, there's 3 wide with Max, as is Lando Norris's new trend that he loses P1 in turn 1. That's what he just likes to do. So Oscar comes out in P1 out of turn 1 and is managing his pace actually pretty well. So it's Oscar 1, Lando 2, Max 3. I think we had a Hamilton 4, or was Ferrari 4 at that point? I don't know, but like the Ferraris and Hamilton were close at that point. It's pretty typical pit strategy, although because of the pit strategy, they wanted to guard against the undercut from Hamilton, I believe. So they pitted Lando first instead of Oscar, even though Oscar was in P1, thereby giving Lando the undercut. And that happened twice. So they, a roundabout way, gave Lando double undercut and gave Lando the lead of the race. And then coming to the end of the race, they said, all right, switch positions back. I think Lando had like a 3-second gap, 3.5-second gap on Oscar at that time. So Oscar in P2. And then they started to say like, hey, Lando, let's switch it back. And then all of a sudden it was like a 4-second gap. And then McLaren and then Lando's engineer comes over the radio. Hey, Lando, we need to get this done. Then it's like a 4.5-second gap. And by the time he's literally coming on the radio, it was so painful to listen to. He's like, we're trying to protect you. This is for the good of the team. So many like, I'm tugging at your heartstrings type of comments.
You will need the team if you're going to win it. Or you will need the team when you win your championship, was one of the lines. And I was like, ooh.
So basically, this sounds like me trying to toilet train my daughter with promising her the mountain, hoping she gives me a little mountain in return if you guys get my drift.
Yes. Gotcha.
Yeah, it definitely felt like a big load in the diapers, this whole situation. But at the end of it, I think that with maybe 2-3 laps left, Lando had put 6 seconds on Oscar.
And then 6+. He was like almost a 7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then finally on the start-finish straight, slowed down and let him pass. And they gave it a 1-2. But it just soured the whole moment. And I think Lando handled it with absolute class. And I guess all reports after me said he was like, he felt bad about kind of souring Oscar's first win. Because there was like obvious tension in the cool down room. I don't know if you guys saw that.
Yeah.
Hamilton was kind of just shooting the breeze with him, and Lando was not in the mood. And he was like, I think Hamilton said like, "Oh, your car's so fast now," and Lando's response was, "So what? You had a fast car for 7 years," or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I was gonna say, are we a couple steps away from Lando dressing in all black, painting his face white, and just listening to like the Smids from here on out?
Yeah. Welcome to the Black Parade, Lando.
So I think the other part of that was Oscar Piastri was very, I mean, he's so reserved anyway, but he was very like nonchalant about the whole thing after the fact too, right? Like the interview after was just like, yeah, I won. You know, like he didn't even like celebrate the win almost, you know, like he got out of the car and like raised his arms up, but like barely ran over to the team, you know, like didn't do the like dive into the team thing that most of the drivers do when they win. And this is this kid's first win in Formula One. So, I mean, from all I read, it seems like he is very, very, very reserved in that stuff. So like maybe it's not natural for him to celebrate the way most people might. But it definitely added to the feeling of the tension after the race, because you had Lando, who, as you said, kind of was like snappy with Lewis, also like went in and like set his helmet down and like threw the hat onto the ground or whatever.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
And then you have the you know, Oscar on the other side of it, who's like, I mean, he's kind of like setting himself up to be the next Kimi Räikkönen with his like, just like he's going to give you a 5 every day, no matter what. Like the world's coming to an end. He's a 5. The first race of his Formula One career, he's a 5.
Yep. No peaks and valleys.
Yep.
Never too high, never too low. So I guess as I get the Esteban Ocon, aka Todsington's recap of the race, is my point from a previous episode a good one, that despite their success, McLaren's slowly turning into Ferrari?
I would argue that I don't know if they've ever had perfect strategy. They've had some fumbles for sure. They've had some really shining moments. But I also don't think up until this point, because this team is still relatively young in like a staff sense,
right,
that they're not as polished as we see in Red Bull or Mercedes was for a long time, or I guess still is, right? Their pit strategy, everything is.
The reason
good
I
still.
asked is I'm going to kind of contradict my own question, because if this was Ferrari, I could see a situation where in that last corner of that last lap, somehow Carlos would crash into Charles and then they would both be out of the race, despite being 1 and 2. That would probably be the most Ferrari thing. So maybe they're not there. And to your point, it's a young team, and there's that adage in American sports that sometimes young teams don't know any better and they don't understand the moment, and then maybe they take a joke about it after the fact. But based on the fact that Nick is telling us we've got arguably the oldest 25-year-old in Oscar Piastri in the world, who doesn't celebrate things, who is literally doing his taxes, or he's chopping up onions like the famous Dave Chappelle sketch. And yeah, I think we are watching a man possibly go through a self-actualization in Lando, where he's trying to truly decide Is he going to be our crown prince, or is he going to be the bad guy that was promised?
It felt like a little bit of a villainy sense.
We're watching that man break bad, so to speak, right? He's very much shaved his head now. Now he's still teaching chemistry in the high school, but there's some nefarious stares in the camera. There's a couple of growling of voices. I'm sure he's going to have an alter ego pretty soon at the next race.
He's not Heisenberg yet.
Yeah, I mean, he just recently realized that his best friend
is not his best friend.
Is nowhere near his best friend, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, his best friend is willing to put him completely out of the race. No, I think it was really, to play a little bit of devil's advocate, the team couldn't have done anything either way, right? Had they brought Oscar in first, either of those times, I think you still end up like,
no,
with, you don't think so?
No, I mean, like, I think they were scared of their pace holding true, but because their pace held true for the whole race, if they brought in Oscar first, Lando still would have ended up P2. And I think they would have had the other conversation with Lando that he would be challenging pace-wise, because we've seen it multiple times this season where in that like later stint in the race when the fuel gets out of the car and he's running light, that his pace just comes alive when he's chasing Max down in whatever that was a few races ago.
But that's why I think that he would have ended up probably beating Oscar.
But that would have been like if they could have said like, okay, you're free to race if we have Oscar 1, Lando 2. But that's a much different situation. Or they could have told him to hold station and be like, hey, we're on for a 1-2, no fighting. There's 10 laps left, whatever. That's a much easier pill to swallow than I'm in the lead. I just put 6 seconds on a dude. But because Oscar, started quote unquote out front and managed his pace well, we're going to give it to him. Like, honestly, if I was in Lando's position, probably wouldn't have given the position back. It'd be fine. It'd be fine if Lando or if Oscar was in P2 and had better pace, or Lando was like kind of holding him up just because he didn't want to get in the dirty wake and actually like burn his tires out. I'd be fine if that was the thing. But he put 6 seconds on him, and he wasn't like managing his tires like that hard, or like he wasn't taking the life out of his tires too hard, I should say.
But see, that's my thing. That's my thing. I think he puts himself right next to Oscar. If the roles are switched and Oscar pits first, I still think Lando catches him. To your point, he is the fastest car on track for the last 15 laps, every race the last 5, with the exception of blowing tires with Max or whatever, right?
Yeah,
but like that to me is why I think it's impossible for the team to make the right decision. There's no easy decision for the team to make.
There's not, but I will say this: if the roles were reversed, and to your point, Oscar was the one that was in the Lando spot, and then in the very last lap of the race, they're asking him to pull team orders and let Lando through. McLaren would get vilified. I think that would complete the Lando Norris heel turn, and then we're having a completely different conversation. So to me, this almost seems like we got you, Oscar, because we see a situation down the line where we're not going to give this to you, so why don't we just go ahead and take the easy road, so to speak, towards your first win. Now, that being said, I don't know that much about Oscar Piastri, but everything I saw during the quick Googling while you guys were chatting, to your point, Nick, I couldn't tell if that dude was rained upon or if he won his Formula One race, because he's just so stoic. So he's got a bit of Tim Duncan in him in that regard. And I like that usually, but it can't feel good. And this is one of the talking points I always bring up whenever we have these episodes of these guys are known to have historically large egos. And I wonder, does he almost turn into a punchline amongst the other drivers? Because I could see the wrong driver to say to Oscar, like, hey, nice win, Lando. I mean, Oscar.
I could see people trying to get under his skin like that, but I would say you don't want to mess with the silent types, the reserved types, the kids in the corner. If anything we can take away from the Drake versus Kendrick beef, just let the ones that disappear off into their own world be in their own world. Don't poke the bear.
And I was going to say, it's funny you say this because Lando does give big Canadian energy, so to speak, the likes of which we haven't seen since Lance and Nicholas and other favorite Canadians. Go on, Todd.
No, I was going to say, instead of a Tim Duncan comparison, I'd give more of a Kawhi Leonard comparison because he's like almost socially inept where he's like comes off as awkward.
But is Oscar that way? I mean, I genuinely...
I think so. Like,
okay.
In like the marketing stuff, when they try to like present him as like fun loving, it just kind of comes off as like a little awkward.
Anybody that's Lando's teammate is not going to be as charismatic on camera. So I feel like
true, which is fine. Like the reason it made me think of that is because Nick, you mentioned Kimmy earlier, and he does have a little bit of that about him. But like, I feel like Kimmy was in on the joke, and being the sarcastic asshole because he knew that, like he wanted to be like fill that void role. I don't think that Oscar is that necessarily. Like he comes off as that and is like sarcastic, like I'm gonna deadpan you on something that you're trying to get excited about. So that he gives that Kimmy energy in that sense, but it's more of like a Kawhi Leonard where he's like awkward and he doesn't know what to do. The thing that made me think of that is before that race, that fan ran up on him in the car and tried to give him a $5 note or whatever. Like you have to watch it. It's hilarious. Some fan, he was entering the track. Oscar rolls down the window. The guy says like, here's $5 to, for good luck or something for the race. And he ended up keeping it because he was like so awkward. He didn't know what to do. And then after the race, he said like he was in a cold plunge and holding that $5. And he was just saying like, I guess this is like a thing now. And then he was like, disclaimer, no one give me money. This isn't like a thing or whatever. But he was trying to make a joke out of it. And again, came off, I felt as like a little awkward, trying to be funny kind of.
Yeah.
And I think the more I think about it, the Kawhi Leonard thing is probably the better comparison because the other attempts at humor, although I still kind of find it funny, was his whole parenting saga with Charles Leclerc.
I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah. And I feel like that's the dry humor we kind of associate with Kawhi Leonard. So I think to your point, Todsley, that was a good shout by you where he's definitely got a little more Kawhi than Timmy in him. But it's still... Are we worried that this type of behavior is going to impact things in the long run for McLaren? Or do you think this is just a lone bump in an otherwise smooth road that's been kind of, if I'm trying to be objective, like McLaren's overachieving at this point because none of us thought they would be this good. Like this is almost like a Ferrari-like resurgence that first year that Ferrari was kind of good again.
So I think that that Oscar is also awkward, socially awkward because he hasn't had a camera in his face like this ever, right? We've all been talking about Lando for the last how many years? And the media is, I mean, most of F1 media that we see is always going to favor the British drivers. So Lando has always been like the star child we've all been waiting for collectively through this lens, right? So like even when Oscar's doing great as a driver for McLaren in the last like 6 to 10 races, we haven't really seen much of him with any real energy or emotion around it, right? Yes, he can finish second or third. It's great. Whatever you gotta, you're on the podium. You've got, points, all these things, but like, there's never been real like pressure, like focus of our energy on Oscar. So I think that ties into his kind of, it almost like elevates his awkwardness in a sense. So he's kind of learning. Don't you think that's
his by his own doing though? Like I know it's his second year in Formula One. He's still getting used to being in the limelight, etc. But during that time, it's not like he's been, and this might sound like revisionist history, I don't think he's been doing that bad, but he has struggled in race pace generally during the races, right? So like he qualifies and he kind of stays where he is-ish. Like he's not going to fly through the field because he's been struggling on race pace kind of so far. So like he's not going to be in the limelight because he's not P2, P3 fighting for wins consistently. This
but
is the first.
I don't think so. I think that's unfair to like kind of pigeonhole him in that sense, because if you think of like all the other people on the grid, right? Like Checo, for instance, like we're gonna talk about him. The media is gonna talk about him. Everything about him, and it's like the guy's consistently 7th to 15th place at this point. Nothing against him, but like the media goes after him because of the Max connection, blah blah blah.
But again,
it's almost like
because he's
Max,
in a top team. McLaren up until this point hasn't been a top team.
But like we would hear from Danny Rick in a RB car that we don't really need to hear from him. You know what I mean? Like, I just think that like you hear from Lewis on a regular basis, even if his car's terrible and he's in 7th or 8th. And I don't think you can avoid the limelight in any way in Formula One, but I think that your responses naturally tone down, care about you in a sense. It kind of goes back to that, like, like, I don't know, this might be a like deep cut for racing, but like, if you've ever heard Randy Popst after winning a race, he is the smoothest talking human being on the planet. And it's like, I'm just happy that my Pirelli tires and my, WeatherTech floor mats and my Razzo shift knob and my, Brembo brakes. And it's like, he rattles off 50 sponsors in one complete sentence. And like, that to me is kind of like what you get from Lewis, right? So like, we always are going to go back to Lewis because everybody's happy to hear from him. And like the same thing with I think Lando's really good on camera with those things. Not that they're shouting out sponsors or anything, but like just that smooth flow of like conversation.
It's conversational.
And we don't get that with Max, or we didn't. We do get it a little bit more now. He's become more human as he's gone. But I think like with Oscar, and I'm just playing devil's advocate with this because like I obviously am a Lando fan first. I think Oscar is great, but to Rohit's question, I think you're seeing the preview of like two really great drivers in a really great car, and historically that never lasts.
So what you're telling me is Oscar for the Mercedes seat in a year and a half?
Maybe.
Yeah.
But I think you were right earlier, Ro, and you're thinking that let's give Oscar this because down the road, if Lando keeps his current form, which by all accounts he will, and by his proven track record, he's been steady, fast pair of hands in the last 4 seasons probably. I don't think they're going to give Oscar this preferential treatment because they realize that they're not necessarily just fighting for constructors. It is totally feasible that we could be talking about Lando as a world champion at the end of the season.
So let me ask you both this, because you are two of the biggest McLaren fans I know, and arguably you're the only two McLaren fans I know, but I live in a very sheltered existence, so enough of that. Looking at it from a totality perspective, has Oscar Piastri's career thus far been exactly what McLaren needed, or is there room for improvement? Because I think it's one of those things that when there's no aspiration, it's very easy to overachieve and do great things because there's nothing expected of you. But now he's built on what I consider to be 1.5 fairly successful seasons, all things considered, because he came in completely blind in terms of never having a prolonged Formula One career. And I think he's doing admirably well, all things considered. And it further makes Alpine look like a bunch of clowns right now because they let him slip through their fingers. But is there any other room for improvement? Because ultimately, I do put on my Red Bull prognostication glasses. If this is the way that we're expecting McLaren to operate, I joked about it earlier, but I truly don't think Oscar will be there long for this world because I think he has that ambition to be more than a Valtteri or a Checo. And I don't know if McLaren's going to give him that.
I don't think McLaren's going to necessarily like give him anything or take anything away from him. But I do think that Lando is proving to be one of the top 3 drivers week in and week out. Like I think the other thing about it is, they're both 24, 25. Lando's been racing in a Formula One car for 5 years, right? 2019, like pre-pandemic, right? Was his first seat. I mean, that's
2019 or 2018. So
like these guys have long careers. ahead of them. So, I hope that they are competing with each other at McLaren for the next 3 to 5 years at a minimum. I don't think that there's any question that Lando is the front runner at that team. He's been there so long. He's stuck with them so long, just signed a long-term deal. Nothing against Oscar, but it's kind of like, if you're the Lakers and you sign LeBron and you've still got Kobe, or if you're, the Bulls with Jordan and then you end up signing a Kobe or some other legendary player, your first commitment is to the guy that's already been there 5 years. And I think that's going to be the interesting thing to watch, is like to see how they navigate that. It's going to be really fascinating. But I also think that both of those guys can look around the grid and realize that it takes a long time for these teams to come back from the depths of where they've been, unless they have everything working. And McLaren has everything working right now. No other team on the grid can say that. Everybody's got, 80% of things working. Anybody has a chance to land on the podium, but McLaren is consistently the most, on the podium the most of this team right now.
Yeah, I would basically echo that. I just think it's not a problem for them yet, because Lando, like Nick said, is like one of the top drivers, and Oscar feels like he's on his way there, but he's not there yet. He's still got a few
growing pain years, in a sense.
Yeah. He's still got a few things to figure out: race-based tire management.
I mean, he's got to race head-to-head with Max for a handful of races, right? Like, that's definitely a part of the growing pains of Formula One.
You have to get ran into by Max. Yeah. Max has to run into you.
Speaking of running into